My pleasure being here today. Thank you for having us. My topic today is going to be title insurance fraud. And maybe a talk you probably haven't heard in the past, so hopefully you find it interesting. These are all real situations that have happened at our company, and I enjoy sharing them with real estate agents and escrow people because it kind of gives you an idea of what we're faced with every day. And usually when we're faced with it, there's also going to be some realtors that are going to be faced with the same situation. So let's go ahead and get right into here. I'm going to go over some general warning signs, some of the most popular targets right now as far as fraud targets, some of the scams that are going on right now, and then I'll get into the real title claims of Lawyers Title Company. And what I came up with is 4 scenarios that have actually become title claims at our company and are going to cost us money. Creditors have a longer memory than you think is the most recent one. This came to light January of this year. The magic short sale, the do-it-yourself short sale, and FSBO fraud. And FSBO fraud is kind of interesting for real estate agents or realtors' perspective because you're probably constantly fighting a battle with people that think that they can represent themselves in real estate transactions. And this kind of lets you know what type of risks are involved when people try to represent themselves. They are a great target for fraud, and we actually got stung pretty hard on that particular situation. Some of the warning signs you're going to see out there are gift or no value transfers. This has been a sore subject for real estate transactions for many, many years, and it still is. As long as I've been alive, and I really hate to share that number with you right now, is nobody's ever given me a piece of real estate, ever. Not my parents, who say they love me, but they've never given me any real estate. Not my brothers, not my friends, not my wife, not my in-laws. Nobody's given me any real estate. So when that happens, it's kind of a unique situation. Multiple transfers of title or fractional interest transfers. These have become very popular with people trying to postpone or forego a foreclosure. You may have ran into some transactions where you see a 5% interest that's given to a stranger to title. 99% of the time you're going to see that recipient of the title is in some form of bankruptcy. And what they do is they send that information to the foreclosing bank and they use that to postpone the foreclosure. Unknown agents or escrow holders. We've actually had real estate agents that have been longtime customers of ours contact us, and they have a pending transaction that just seems a little unusual with parties that they are not familiar with or have never heard of before, and they sometimes ask us to check them out to see if they're legitimate. We actually caught a ring of people impersonating an escrow trying to sell investors on bulk purchases of 20 to 40, 50 properties at a time for an unbelievable discount, and come to find out that it wasn't even a real escrow that they were being asked to wire their deposit into. So they dodged a bullet on that one. Uncontrolled documentation. As time goes on, you know, when I first got into this business in the 80s, it was unheard of for you to go anywhere except to your escrow officer to have documents notarized into transactions. It's exactly 100% opposite now. It's more rare for somebody to actually appear in front of the escrow holder and sign documents. So this uncontrolled document situation tends to open the door for people to commit fraud. Identity theft or people impersonating sellers in transactions or even borrowers has become a very big problem in the industry right now. Never meeting or seeing the principals kind of ties into that. Recent amendments to LLCs or corporations. Believe it or not, California, with its great leadership and super control over every tiny minute detail, you can actually file amendments or changes to a corporation, and as long as you file or you pay the filing fee, the county or the state will update their records whether or not it's a legitimate document or not. So it really makes confirming entity documents very difficult sometimes. So sometimes your escrow or your title company is going to be asking you for some more documentation for corporations, and that's why we need to make sure we're really dealing with the right people. Unreasonable rush requests or urgent rushes, or somebody comes to you and they want to close a transaction in 2 or 3 days, kind of raises our awareness that there may be something going on with that too. Most transactions can't close that quickly, although some can. And the San Gabriel Valley is actually a pretty good example of an area that there are occasions where there's all cash buyers and they're ready to close right away. So it can happen, but it does raise everybody's awareness when it's really being pushed. Hard money or transactional financing. This has become the new subprime lending source right now. And not only are we dealing with some, less than scrupulous hard money lenders, they are also targets of fraudsters as well. When you get into a situation where you're borrowing money from a hard money lender, they sometimes are the victim of fraud as well. Let's see here, targets, elderly or retired persons, non-owner occupied, free and clear properties, sometimes a combination of all this. In this age of information, you're able to obtain farm requests like we used to do in old days, where you get a geographical area and you zero on single family residences, a specific lot size, a specific square footage. Well, now these fraudsters are obtaining frauds that disclose non-owner occupied free and clear properties. And they buy this data, and that's who they target to commit fraud against. So whenever there's a situation where there's a lot of money coming out of a transaction, it's real important to make sure that you're dealing with the actual owner of the asset. Distressed homeowners, unfortunately, when you're down on your luck and you're having trouble with making your payments and so forth, believe it or not, there's a lot of people that will still try to take advantage of you. They take advantage of people that want to hear that there's some type of solution for their situation. And it's not right, it's not nice, but people are at a vulnerable state, and people do take advantage of that emotion. Independent escrow companies, they're also sometimes targeted as victims of fraud because they're like the rest of us. They're trying to get business and they're trying to do business. Sometimes people will come in and try to take advantage of that situation as well. And private hard money lenders, kind of already discussed that. Fraudulent manufactured documents. We still, to this day, see a lot of false documents. Documents that have been created by means of identity theft, people creating fake identifications, fake notary stamps. Sometimes they just create one from thin air. Sometimes they'll actually take a actual notary stamp from a known notary, and they'll splash it. They'll make a copy of it, and they'll start using that notary stamp in order to do business. We had one of our own internal escrow officers whose stamp was about to expire. Somebody started using her stamp, and they were notarizing all kinds of documents. And you may look at it and go, oh, I know her, that's a good notary, there's no problem there. Well, it turns out she was a victim of having her stamp identity stolen.
Wow.
Yeah. Property rescue scams. It's starting to dwindle off a little bit because there's not as many distressed properties as there were, maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, but it's still out there. Foreclosure postponement, loan modification is a good angle. You'll have a distressed homeowner and somebody will approach them and say, hey, I can help you modify your loan. This is what I'm going to do. And that's what they want to hear. That's what you want to hear if you're about to lose your home. Somebody's going to help you. They're going to take the time to help you. And the way they do that is they produce a bunch of documentation. They have you start making your sample payments, your test payments directly to them so that they can pay the bank while they're negotiating your modification. And little do you know, all they're doing is postponing or delaying your foreclosure while they just pocket the money. And what ends up happening every time, unless you're dealing directly with the bank, is they get foreclosed on, they lose their home, and whatever money they pay. Fractional deeds to BK debtors, I kind of talked about that already, and forged documents. Just plain, flat out forged documents submitted sometimes actually through the escrow transaction, and they end up being false. Let's start with the first example. This is the most recent one. Okay, this is what I like to call this is a short sale that an agent was working on, and it had a judgment. Now, we've seen many short sales that have judgments that have to be negotiated. This particular judgment was for $10,000, and from our eyes, it looked like a typical transaction where they were going to come up with, in this case, it is showing $1,430.83 to pay this judgment. The collection company, West Valley Agency, everything looked legitimate on there. And unfortunately in this case, the title unit that closed it, they probably should have noticed that West Valley Agency was not the judgment creditor, and they were not the judgment attorney. So this really, if you look at it, hindsight being 2020, was not really a good demand. They probably should have pulled the recording or asked more questions, but sometimes you get busy and you end up letting these things slip through. Here's our check that we sent out. I always like to try to include a copy of the check whenever it's available because it kind of makes it real. So we paid the $14.30 to the agency, and it was attention this Valerie Matthews who submitted the demand. So far so good, everything looks good, until I get a call in January, and it's the judgment creditor wanting to know how we closed without paying him. So that's a great call to get first thing in the morning. I was bragging to Nancy that I never spilled my coffee. I might have spilled a little bit that day. So I look at everything, and everything looks legitimate. It looks like we paid a demand. It looks like it was a fairly decent demand. There are collection companies that help people collect demands, but after talking to this gentleman a couple times, I found out that we may be in trouble. And this email that I asked him to send to me not only proves that we paid a demand that wasn't valid, but it also proved that the real estate agent and the escrow was working on the same transaction in 2011. So 3 years prior to that. And the story goes like this. They negotiated a discounted payment of $3,000. The demand offer was only good for a specific amount of time. That time passed. They ended up getting another deal in escrow. The agent went back to the creditor's attorney and tried to get them to accept the same offer. The creditor said, no, we want full payment now. Kills your deal, right? Not always. This particular real estate agent was a little bit more motivated than most. So what happened was, she ended up, I believe, creating her own demand, kind of a do-it-yourself kind of payoff demand. This is just more of the documentation that shows that there was prior communication with the real estate agent. When I questioned where the demand came from, it was kind of like asking your kids who broke the window. They all pointed at each other. The escrow pointed at the agent. The agent said, well, I got the demand from the debtor or the seller. So everybody was pointing themselves at, their fingers at each other. All we know is we got it from the escrow, and it seems that they may not have checked it out that well. But this is an email where the agent made a deal with the other agent to split paying off this $3,000 judgment out of their commissions. So this is some more conversation from this creditor that says that he advised the agent that he was not going to accept the $3,000 and it was going to be full payment. And also went on to confirm that the agency that collected the debt is not affiliated with them. This is pretty good letter that the escrow received from our legal department. And kind of an interesting scenario happened after this. Once we find out there's fraud, the judgment creditor insisted that we pay him $10,000 plus, whatever the interest ended up being. We don't know where our check went. The check was cashed by somebody. It's kind of a mystery right now. And I'll tell you a little bit about some investigation we did after that made it kind of interesting. But this is a letter that the escrow officer received from our legal department asking for them to contribute the full amount to pay the judgment, stating that it was the loss may have been a result of their negligence and not securing a proper payoff demand. So it's a formal request that they pay $10,000 some odd dollars. Escrow officer really wasn't too happy to receive that letter, stating, quote unquote, I'm just a paper pusher. And it's funny, and the reason I bring that up, and it's kind of funny now afterwards, but we all get to a point where we kind of think of ourselves as being paper pushers, because that's what it feels like sometimes. But we're actually dealing with some pretty large assets here. There's a lot of money moving back and forth, and we're not just paper pushers. We're actually doing a legal transfer of real property, and each and every one of us is responsible for their portion of the transaction, not just the title company. So what happens when they take a huge loss, they're going to probably try to get some recoupment from the parties that they feel that were responsible for it. Another interesting side fact, through our investigation, we found out that the address that we sent the check to ended up being a residence. And just to come find out, the residence was listed by the broker who was doing our transaction. How about that? It almost seems like it would be a made-for-TV movie, right? I might have to get working on that. So anyway, lessons learned on this one is there's a lot of creditors right now that do post-closing or post-contact searches. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of data available, and you'll find your big lenders, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Aquid, they all hire companies after a short sale is done, and they'll check the title 3 months later, 6 months later, to see if anything out of the ordinary has been done on the property, such as restoring the property back to the original borrower or debtor. And that's not a good phone call to get either. I've actually had that before too. The other thing that they are looking for, these creditors that get requests for payoff demands, this particular guy, I asked him, how did you find this out? Because I would imagine that the agent thought there's so much time went by, the creditor's never going to know that the deal closed without their being paid. And this creditor said that they take every contact that's made with them and they follow it up on a monthly basis. And if they find out that they were contacted about a judgment on a specific transaction and they weren't paid, that's when they make the call to the title company and collect. So good for them. They're going to get paid their 100% of their judgment for their client. So they're doing a real good job. There's no such thing as paper pusher. We're definitely not paper pushers. And the agents, the escrow holders, and the title company, we could all be responsible when a transaction goes bad. And you definitely don't want to be involved in that. Okay, the magic short sale. Does that make sense to everybody what happened on that one? Okay, magic short sale. This is kind of a good one too. Short sale for $950,000. Purchase money loans totaling $1.112 million. A little unusual, especially for a short sale, right? Second lender's closing instructions don't match the transaction. In this case, we dodged a bullet. The TO caught this and pulled the recording, which they never like to do. Just so you know, if you ever had a recording pulled by a title company, and I know I got a couple of title company brothers out there in the audience, we do not like to pull recordings. The TOs come to me like babies. They want to try to find a way not to pull the recording. It's not a call they want to make. You know, we don't get paid when deals don't close, just like real estate agents and escrow. So we don't like to do that. The escrow officer in this case is trying to tell us that the second lender made a mistake and with forward amended closing instruction. So what we found on this one, here's the short sale approval, and you'll see that there's a sales price of $950,000. And everything else on it looks pretty decent. This is the first loan instructions that's showing a liability amount for $1.112 million, and it's showing a first and a second deed of trust, and it's split up in different amounts. And kind of generic, this is a private lender, a hard money lender, so this isn't going to be your normal lender's instructions that you'll find in most transactions. Where we caught this was on the second loan instructions that actually look a little bit more like your regular lender's instructions you'll see when you'll close. But if you'll notice right here, you see that they're showing a sales price of $1.8 million. That's kind of questionable, isn't it? It's supposed to be $950,000. The second lender thinks the sales, $1.8 million. Well, now everything makes sense. At first, why would anybody overfund a transaction by a couple $100,000? Well, I'll tell you how they'll do that. They'll do that because they think the sales price is $1.8 million and the buyer's coming in with the balance of cash, which is how they got the hard money loan approved. So there you go. You got a hard money lender who sometimes people think are the bad guys. They're getting taken advantage of because they put together a manipulated transaction and matching HUD-1s for that matter that back all this up. So the hard money lender was about to be taken advantage of as well. And here's the HUD-1. You like to say, oh, maybe the escrow made a mistake, there's something weird going on. No, here's the HUD-1 that they provided to the lender, showing the sales price of $1.8 million. So we got lucky and avoided a claim on this one. The escrow, listing agent, and all the participants were probably trying to commit fraud against the lender. It's a way for you to take money out of a transaction that may not actually have any money or proceeds. Make sure the transaction has sense. Common sense, it's kind of rare these days. People just don't seem to have it, I guess. I don't know what it is, but if it doesn't make sense, don't doubt yourself, especially if you're representing a buyer. If your transaction doesn't make sense, it needs to make sense. And when it comes down to it, when somebody buys and sells a piece of property, it's really not that complex. You list it, You accept the price and you pay for it. If it starts getting a little bit more complicated than that, and of course sometimes they do, maybe make sure you understand it. If you're a realtor, you possess a level of intelligence that's going to be able to make a lot of things make sense to you. And if it doesn't make sense, let's all talk about it and make some sense out of it. So don't be afraid to ask questions. I've been doing this for almost 30 years and I still ask questions. Right when I think I've seen every scenario that you have ever heard of, there's a new one that comes in and just blows me away. That one make sense to everybody?
Yes.
All right. How am I doing on time? I'm not babbling on too long, am I here? Okay. Here's a do-it-yourself short sale. Now this one's probably one of my favorites because it's probably one of the largest claims that our office has taken in the last 5 or 6 years. It's probably going to end up being a loss of about $1.8 million to the company. And we didn't even insure the short sale. We insured a private party refinance after a short sale. And here's how it happened. We were asked to insure a $1.5 million private money refinance. The prior short sale closed in August of 2011, and it was one of those transactions where they don't disclose the sales price public record. And this all happened right around October of 2011, so you kind of get an idea of the timing here. 10 days after the short sale closed, no value disclosed, there was a private loan put on the property for $1.45 million. That was insured by the same company. So we got a short sale, and then we got a private party refinance, both insured by the same title company. 30 days later, they opened an order with us. And on the surface of it, it looks like a very simple transaction. We're being asked to insure a refinance to pay off that $1.45 million private party loan. So far, everything sounds good, right? Prior loans totaled more than $3.3 million on this property. So prior to the short sale, there was over $3 million of loans on the property. That's a lot. $1.5 million, it almost seems like it could be in line because back then the property values were down. It was a decreasing market, so it's possible that everything was legitimate. There was a lot of pressure from the escrow holder and our sales rep to get this deal closed. Everybody was pushing. They were pushing hard. And they wanted it done quickly, and they wanted it done as painlessly as possible. Whenever a title company is being asked to insure after another title company's short sale, and those original documents or deeds of trust are not reconveyed yet, you usually have to go back to that same title company. Because if I insure afterwards, I'm taking that other title company off the hook if they had any mistakes or if they had a problem with their short sale. So that's usually what happens. The TO in our case ended up finding a policy issued by Fidelity National Title Insurance, which is a sister company to us. So they felt that it was okay to rely on that title policy because it was issued by the same parent company as ours. Here's where the problem stems from. Come to find out, the property is in La Cañada, Flint Ridge, and even at that moment in time, the property was worth over $3 million. Here's the HUD one from the transaction that was closed by it's not a sister company to ours. It's a company that used to be underwritten by a Fidelity company, and I believe this transaction actually lost them their underwriting agreement with Fidelity, so now they have to go through a different company. They insured a sales transaction for $250,000 on this $3 million plus property with $3.3 million alone on it. Go back to a little bit of common sense. Is that a reasonable loss for a lender to take for $3 million encumbrance? Probably not. $250,000, that's pretty low ball for La Cañada, Flint Ridge. Of course, we didn't know all this at the time because we didn't have their policy and we didn't know what the sales price was because they hid the doc stamps. Here's a copy of the fraudulent short sale demand. What we found out was that there was an insider at B of A working with a group of real estate agents creating fake short sale demands. And if I'm told correctly on this one, they figured that B of A was so busy with short sales that they could just print one up and send the money in, and that they were so unorganized, they would just accept the money and release the lien. Which sometimes I guess it feels like banks are like that. They're not. Just in case you're wondering. They're not. So there's a fake demand, and the property is still in default, of course. Here's a follow-up story that you may have seen in the news, and I didn't white out everybody's information on this just because of the fact that all these people were arrested, and they have also, I was given an update before I came over here today that they have all pled guilty to committing fraud to move $1 odd million from the fraudulent transaction. But they were all arrested in October of 2012. Our situation is still ongoing. The claim is in process. Even though the sales price was $250,000, the market value, like I said, was over $3 million. Oh yeah, that's a good thing. The magic short sale. That's a short sale I didn't go through with you because I don't have that much time. But these same people were involved in another fraudulent transaction as well that we found out later. The $3 million first in favor of Bank of America is still of record and is still in foreclosure. Since our file closed, and this is amazing, after we discovered all this, I received another private party loan that they were trying to get us to issue another policy on. And sometimes I just bang my head against the wall. It's like, we know that it's a fraudulent transaction, right? Yes, well, and you want us to insure again. I didn't understand the logic behind that. Of course we didn't, but there was 4 other private loans recorded against this property after this fraud was discovered. So that's that one right there. That's an ongoing claim, but that one is definitely gonna cost us some money. The private lender that we insured on this transaction is kind of infamous for not giving anybody any legroom whatsoever when a mistake happens on a property or a transaction. They're going after everybody, and they love to go after title companies because they know that eventually that's probably who's going to write the first check to them. Last but not least, here I got the FSBO fraud. Am I good for one more story here? Are we okay? Okay. Here's a FSBO that opened with no agents for $175,000. This was a very well-known and trusted independent escrow that I think I've known this escrow officer for 25 years. Very good. South Bay always has done, real high-end transactions. Supposedly knows her business. This is the subject property was a duplex in Los Angeles, non-owner occupied, kind of like one of the targets we talked about earlier. And we had an all-cash buyer. Everything sounds good so far. Successor trustee is representing themselves as a seller in this transaction, and at first they're saying that they can't locate any of the trust documents to prove up that they are the successors. So that's kind of a problem from the beginning. Somehow they end up getting the trust documents because they kept pressuring us. You need to close without the trust documents. You need to take my word for it. I'll sign an affidavit. And we're like, no, you need to show us that you're the successor. So we insist on it. Well, they end up actually getting the real trust documents, and I'll tell you how they did it in a minute. And we look it over and everything looked good. Here is a notary for the person who signed the deed as successor trustee, and I highlighted the date that was February 5th of 2012 because that was Super Bowl Sunday, come to find out. And I kind of found that out in a funny way because whenever we know there's fraud and possible identity theft, we look at the documents and looked at it, found the notary, called the notary up. Hey, just want to see if you actually have any information on this notary that you did on the 5th. And she said, no, I did not perform any notary duties on that day. It was Super Bowl Sunday. So, of course I didn't. And that was a situation where her notary stamp was created out of thin air. Somebody probably did a transaction with her and just copied the notary and just created one. And in this day and age, you can create stamps pretty easily. The other interesting thing is when I contacted the escrow, kind of in a little bit of panic, going, so you never met the seller before, huh? I said, well, where'd the money go? So the next thing you do when you find out that there was some fraud committed, you find where'd the money go? Let's find where the money went. Well, this was pretty interesting. The money went to everybody but the seller. So you'll see all these are check listings right here. So here's a 9,000, 8,000, 9,000, 16,000. So all these different checks went to somebody that was not the seller. And when I asked the escrow officer about that, she said, well, I had a signed instruction that the nephew brought in that showed where they wanted the proceeds to go. Okay, so that's kind of scary. The one interesting thing is, though, they did feel a little bit guilty, and they authorized a check for $859 to the Red Cross of America. So I guess that's going to get them to heaven or wherever they're going to end up going in the end. So, but this is one of those deals where I got a phone call from somebody who was, claiming, "Hey, I'm the owner of the property. How did you guys close the transaction?" And I'm like, "Come on! I thought it was my brother, playing a joke on me." No, it wasn't. It was really him. And come to find out, the escrow had zero control of the entire transaction. Documents were carried in by somebody saying that they were a nephew, and the checks were, or godson, I guess it was godson. And the proceeds of this transaction went everywhere except to the seller. So this is what you would probably call, in our case, a total failure of title, and we're going to have to take action to restore the property to the actual rightful owner and probably compensate the insured, unless the insured ended up being part of it, which of course they'll investigate, because sometimes that happens as well. And here's the action for the actual real seller who's suing everybody, including us right there. The lawyer title in California. So that claim's in profit and in process. The deed has been confirmed fraudulent. Trust documents were released. Now this is a good one, okay? Keep this one in your arsenal. We wouldn't back down on our requirement to get a copy of the trust. So what these guys did is, the property was really listed for sale. They approached the agent representing the seller and said, "Listen, we want to make an offer on the property, but we want to examine your trust documents before we do so." So they talked about it and they said, okay, so they released the trust documents to the person that was saying that they wanted to examine them before they made an offer. That's how they got the trust documents. I was pretty impressed. But if I was representing the seller, I wouldn't be so impressed. That would have probably been a big mistake. So if anybody comes to you and tries to do that, keep your guard up on that one. Escrow didn't have proper control of the escrow documents, obviously, and all the disbursements of the sales proceeds were to a non-related party to the transaction. All right, so there's a couple to share with you. I got millions of them. I appreciate your attention.